I absolutely hate what the Golden State Warriors have done this offseason. When you have a top 10 player of all time in Stephen Curry, I believe you have the obligation to basketball and to your fans and to that player to act as such. And all offseason, the Golden State Warriors have done very little to show that they are committed to putting the best team around Steph Curry for this upcoming year. And we've got some interesting quotes over the last few days by Monte Ellis, Jeff Teague, and Mike Dunlevy, their general manager, today in an interview was asked if they would potentially trade Steph Curry if he requested a trade, and they said, or he basically said that him and the owner would talk about it out of respect for Steph Curry. I think this is very interesting timing because everything that they've done leads you to believe that this team is ready to move on to the next era. And we've seen this bite teams in the butt time and time again. The one that comes to mind most of all is when the Chicago Bulls were trying to move off of, that Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson era too soon. And that organization has pretty much been in the crapper ever since, aside from a few years with Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler, that they were decent. But that organization has been struggling to find its footing ever since. When you have a top 10 player of all time and the opportunity to continue to try to compete with that player, you have to take it. Because there's no guarantee that any sort of rebuild, any sort of moving forward is going to happen any quicker if you move on from that superstar faster than you have to. And the Golden State Warriors, in my opinion, should know that. And I think it's been very interesting that ever since Mike Dunleavy has been the primary guy making decisions for this team, I just don't really love the direction of the organization, but it feels like they've been playing on this two-timeline, sort of game that just hasn't worked for them. They've had, players like Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, guys that it feels like they're trying to develop young, and do that at the same time as trying to compete with their older players. Steph Curry, Draymond Green. They brought in Al Horford. You traded for Kristaps Porzingis. But this offseason, they've literally made zero moves. A team that finished 10th in the Western Conference last year, barely made the play-in, is now running it back with the same roster. So my question is, when you came into the offseason, what was your plan? What was your agenda for the offseason? Because it can't have been to only try to sign LeBron James. That can't be your number one direction. James Wiseman's another young guy that, they tried to develop at the same time. But your direction cannot have been, let's just see if we can sign LeBron James and hope that he signs with the Warriors. That's not a direction of an organization. You have to have a plan. And Mike Dunleavy said in this same interview that they've been really aggressive all offseason. You haven't signed anybody? Obviously, you drafted a player in Yasel Lindeborg with the 11th overall pick. He was a Summer League MVP. He looks like he could be a really nice addition to the franchise. But Jimmy Butler's going to be out, it sounds like, until about the trade deadline. He's hoping to come back just before then. Moses Moody is likely out for the year. This team needs some juice. It needs some additions, and I just can't believe that they're trying to run back the same, kind of team that they had last year that did not work and did not play up to, the potential of Steph Curry. Now, we know he only played 40-something games last season, and he's reaching the point in his career where injuries are a concern. So, if you're the Warriors, it is something you have to prepare for, but putting players and pieces around him to where if he needs to take games off in the regular season and you could still be competitive is what I believe an organization should do. And I've seen a lot of frustration from Warriors fans just about, what they've done this offseason and thinking it's going to be a rough upcoming year. You re-sign Draymond Green to a 1-year, $27 million deal. Next offseason, you're going to have Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy Butler are all going to be free agents. So, and Steph Curry is still eligible for an extension. I believe that comes up later in August, if I'm correct. So maybe he signs that. But are they just preparing for that next era? And if that's the direction you're wanting to go, then I would start considering trade partners for Steph Curry. Now, the problem becomes when you have a player as legendary and the best player in your franchise's history, one of the greatest players of all time, you don't want to be the part of the organization, or you don't want to be the piece in that says we're ready to move on. So the Warriors, in what Mike Dunleavy said today, is trying to put the onus, in a sense, on Steph Curry. If he wants to make that decision to move on from Golden State, then they're allowing him to do so, because Mike Dunleavy knows, and this is smart, that if he's the one who trades Steph Curry and this team sucks for the next 5 years, he'll be out of town, fans will hate him, and it's really just not a good look all around. But if Steph Curry comes out and demands a trade, then you're kind of in a different spot where it feels like the onus is a little more on Steph Curry. But the thing is, I don't think Warriors fans would blame or be upset at Steph Curry at this point in his career if he wanted to go to a team where he can make another run at it. I think there's plenty of teams in the NBA with assets that could make a potential move for Steph Curry and put him on a little more competitive basketball team, which is what we all want to see. I'm not a Warriors fan, but I'm a huge NBA fan, and you have to be a huge Steph Curry fan if you love basketball. What we want to see is that man play in big basketball games again. And it feels like the last few years we haven't got to see that. We've seen him in play-in games. But in the Olympics against France, that final, we put on just an absolutely legendary performance. And again, that's what we want to see out of Steph Curry. We want to see that at the end of his career and what he still has in the tank. And I kind of feel like that the Warriors have the obligation to make sure that that's possible through building that team around him, and that's just not what they've done. And I just think it's frustrating. The lineup right now is looking like Steph Curry, DeAnthony Melton, Brandon Podziemski, Gary Payton, Guy Santos, Yasel Lindeberg. Sorry, I'm struggling saying his name. I'll get more used to it as we go. Draymond Green, Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, Jimmy Butler, and Moses Moody. Sounds like they're going to be out for a while, like I said. So, I mean, this team has some players. Will Richards, I believe, as well. This team has a couple players, but ultimately that team is not going to be able to compete as the Spurs continue to get better, as the Oklahoma City Thunder have built a really, really quality roster, and you're going to see teams rise up in the Western Conference. You think of teams like the Utah Jazz are going to continue to get better. The Portland Trail Blazers have made some moves this offseason. The Timberwolves trading for LaMelo Ball. Will that team be any better? Other teams are just making moves trying to, better their chances at the playoffs or competing for a championship, and the Warriors have just stood pat, and that's very frustrating. On the other hand, when a guy like Steph Curry or a legendary player gets out of the public eye for any period of time, you start to hear wild things said about him. And obviously Steph Curry's not out of the public eye in that sense. They're still playing on Christmas Day. That was announced today. Or yesterday, I guess, by the time y'all are going to be watching this video. But you are having players like Jeff Teague come out and say that if you replace Steph Curry with Damian Lillard on those Warriors teams, they would still win championships. And I think that statements like that are just ridiculous because they don't account for everything that Steph Curry brings to the table. A player that, has been able to lead a team with Draymond Green in it and really embrace what Draymond Green brings to the table. And this is not me knocking Draymond Green, but you have to have a special player that can handle the ejections, the physicality, the suspensions, all those sorts of things, the yelling back and forth with the coaches and other players. The leadership Steph Curry has to show in those moments is something that can't just be plugged in by any other player that's out there, and that's underrated. But obviously the gravity of Steph Curry, his performance in the playoffs has been better than Damian Lillard in big moments. Damian Lillard obviously has some legendary buzzer beaters, but as you've advanced farther in the playoffs, we've seen Damian Lillard struggle. Steph Curry has stepped up in huge ways in big moments, none bigger than 2022 when they won the NBA championship over the Celtics. He was unbelievable in the NBA Finals. Obviously, he's a two-time MVP. And, Monte Ellis, another guy who came out a few days ago and said that if he had the same opportunities as Steph Curry with that roster, they would have won championships too. And that's very frustrating because it's just simply not true. We know that Monte Ellis was a really fun basketball player to watch. He was a really good scorer. good in the mid-range, could drive to the basket, couldn't really shoot the three ball at a high clip. I think it was 31% for his career. So, but I bring all that up to say that when these players are not competing in big basketball games, the narrative sometimes starts to flip a little bit. And just from the aspect of people forget how great Steph Curry is. And that's really sad and frustrating because he's one of the greatest basketball players of all time, arguably the best offensive engine of all time, arguably the most fun basketball player to watch of all time. So I hope that we get some good news for the Warriors, whether it's, a major move or Steph Curry comes out and asks to go to a different team. And it's not anything against the Warriors. It's just saying that, hey, we want to see Steph Curry play in big basketball games at the end of his career, whatever it takes. That's all we got for you. Let me know your thoughts. Do you want to see Steph Curry move on? Do you want to see him finish his career with the Golden State Warriors and just play it out, even if the team isn't very good? But if you love the NBA, make sure you take a second to subscribe to the channel. Appreciate y'all watching. Cyborg out.